Hello, and welcome back to the Intuition Experiment. I am Julie, and I am filled with trepidation. I am terrified. I have tried to record this video on several attempts, and nonetheless, my heart is in my throat right now as I sit down to make the first chapter in what will be my speaking my truth and telling my story. That is the chapter that we all begin with, which is my childhood. And I feel like it's necessary right now to first extend a trigger warning to anyone who would be triggered by topics of alcoholism, domestic violence, neglect, the topic of suicide. I suggest that if these are topics that are too heavy for you, do not continue with this video. That being said, I've went back and I've watched my prior attempts to discuss the topic at hand, and I hate to say it, but I do this thing that I don't feel valid. I don't feel like my experience is valid. I do not validate myself. I do this thing where I am listening back and looking back at the topics I've been discussing, and there's this little trigger, this thing in my head that keeps saying, like, aren't you being whiny? Like, complaining about things, like, was it really even that bad? And it's really not fair of me to do that to myself. I feel like I've done a lot of thinking of how I wanted to unpack this, and initially in my 20s, when I was consumed with hurt and consumed with rage, I wanted revenge. I wanted to throw everyone under the bus who had wronged me. And then I had a spiritual awakening about 3.5 years ago. And I started contemplating the most noble way to discuss these topics. And I had decided that while I would allude to going through periods of intense struggle in my life, that I would only speak and be accountable for my own personal actions. I have a much easier time being accountable and speaking on the mistakes that I've made and the decisions that I've made. And I clam up when it comes to talking about how other people have hurt me. And I think in part that it is because as an adult now, I can see so much of myself in the people that had played a role early on in my life, that in many ways as an adult, I took on those roles for some time. I think the other thing is that I grew up in an environment of lack of accountability, of sweeping things under the rug, of denial, of anger if any situation was brought up. Nobody really talked about what was going on, but there was always something going on. And so right now, truth be told, I'm sitting here trying to pour out my heart, and man, it's so hard. But it is something that I feel mightily that I need to do for myself. And so God, angels, spirit guides, ancestors, I release this. Everything that I am speaking on right now, I release and unburden myself, and I give it into your hands because this is too heavy for me to walk with. From this moment forward, I release it out to the world and I begin my healing, and I hope that this story and my truth is used to help other people who might recognize a bit of themselves and a bit of their story in what I'm about to say. And so I'll start off in 1984 when I was born. I was born to my father, who was 19, my mother, who was 20. Shortly after I was born, they bought a trailer home and stationed that on our long-standing family farm that had belonged to my grandparents, so my father's parents. On the top of this big hill on this farm that used to be called Cherry Knoll Farm was this old, like black and red, no, red and white farmhouse, and next to it was this trailer home that they had rigged to on a permanent foundation. And that was it. We were neighbors with my grandparents, and from early on, I suspect, certainly for as long as I have the memory of, my father was an alcoholic. To the best of my knowledge, he is still presently until this very day. He was an abusive alcoholic. He could fly into fits of rage in what seemed like a moment. You could be having something that felt like a normal conversation, and all of a sudden furniture is being flipped and he is in your face screaming until spit is flying and just showering your face, and there was nowhere to go from it. It was a very intense and scary energy, and I never felt safe with him in the house. If I knew he was coming home, it did not feel safe. It felt like walking on eggshells. There are moments that stand out to me, moments of my mom directing us to find hiding spots in case he ever got out of control. There were nights where I would lie in bed and not be able to sleep initially because my father collected guns and for hunting, which he did occasionally. And I would think on a bad night that he might come in and shoot me in my sleep, that he had the capacity to go in a fit of rage and kill the entirety of the family. Those are really heavy concerns for such a young age. And if I wasn't thinking that, I would be up hearing these fights erupt where my father would be attacking my mother and my mother would be screaming, and there was such an intensity in the environment. There's certain things that stand out, certain moments in time that I feel have left deep scars. One in particular is we were out one evening in the pool. There was a pool, big above ground oval pool that was sat in between our house and my grandparents' house. And it was myself and my siblings. I'm the eldest of four. My grandmother was there. My mother was there. And all of a sudden we hear this massive commotion in our house and this dog yelping, and it sounded like furniture being thrown, or we weren't sure what was going on. But my grandmother starts exchanging kind of nervous glances and says, "Ha ha ha ha, your father must be playing with the dogs again," because we always had dogs. And the truth of the matter is that one of the dogs had had an accident and he got upset. And so between kicking the dog, he was picking it up and throwing it against the wall, and the dog had defecated everywhere. That dog couldn't walk properly after. Like everyone, even myself as a child, we knew my father wasn't playing with the dog. But it's things like that time and time again, it stands out in my mind as deep hurts from how unsafe and uncomfortable it was. And on the flip side, you have my mom, who came with her own, I'm sure, massive set of baggage from a dysfunctional family who threw her out. And she finds herself in the midst of my father's family, secluded on a farm in the middle of nowhere. In the end, having 4 kids in the midst of this crazy, abusive relationship. My father never felt safe physically. My mom was not a safe place to develop a sense of worth or a safe place to always bring my emotions, because she was also very quick to anger, very strict. But where it would be initially lashing out in the form of, say, a spanking, after that, she would shut down, and she has the capacity, and she had the capacity to go for long, long, long periods of time without speaking, to act as if you didn't exist, that you were nothing to her. I remember moments of one in particular where I think the story was that I gave her some kind of attitude about raking the yard. And I must have been about as old as my son is now, 8 years old. And she decided to throw me out, that I didn't deserve that night to sleep in the house. And she sent me out with my blanket and my pillows, and she sent me to the treehouse. And I have a vague recollection of being so sad and so scared. And somehow believing that I didn't deserve even a space in a warm house. I think, if my recollection serves, that it was finally my father who had spoken to her and worn her down and said, let her back in the house, like, let her back into her room to sleep. And I know that she wasn't happy about it. And she went for a long period of time without speaking to me, slapping a plate of food in front of me. I really, really had wanted in my early childhood to know that I was safe and loved with at least my mom. She did not seem to always have the capacity to give that. And in the midst of those struggles, she really struggled, I can tell, with her own mental health, with thoughts of suicide. And there was talk of my mom being suicidal. And I remember my siblings and I being in my grandparents' house, and some fight had erupted between my grandfather and my mother, and I'm in the window screaming like, "Mom, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it," and just crying because she had come out of the house with a knife, and my grandfather wrestled the knife out of her hands, and he disabled something in her car so that she couldn't drive away, because there was talk of her wanting to drive herself off of a bridge. And so there were times, for sure, that I had the worry that if my mom left, I might never see her again. And I had such a fondness for my mom. There were moments, there was a time where that same treehouse that I was sent out to sleep in, that I had fallen. There was a ladder going up and it was not attached, and then boop, boop. This whole big ladder went over with me on it, and I broke my wrist, and nobody at the time knew that I had broken my wrist. But in that moment where I was crying, my mom came out, and I got in trouble for making such a racket because my father was sleeping, and she was worried that I was going to wake up my father. So I did not get the medical attention that I had required at the time. There were moments of feeling worthless. And I couldn't tell that that's what it was at the time. I don't think any child is really equipped to know, oh, because of this situation, I'm having this internalized reaction, or that my subconscious right now is being programmed to believe that on one hand, my safety and my actual physical safety could be in danger with one parent, and my emotional sense of self-worth could be very in danger with another one. You know, my father and my mother finally had separated. I must have been, I don't know, maybe around 10 or so. And I feel like things settled down for a little while. But I came home, I believe, from school one day, and my father was sitting in our dining room area, and my mom was hugging him and kissing him. And she said, "Oh, Julie, your father is coming back to live with us." Aren't you happy? And I would never have spoken this out loud, but of course I was not. I was not happy. And she said, come give your father a hug. Show him how happy you are to have him come back. And even from a very young age, I was so disappointed. I, in that moment, thought, you really love this man more than you love your children because you know what he's going to do. Or do you love yourself, or do you need the validation of this relationship more than you need the safety of your children? Regardless of what that was, he did come back. And it was on the day before I was supposed to start high school. That night, there was this massive fight. The children were in bed, and there was this massive fight that it had erupted between my parents, and my father was strangling my mother, and she was screaming for us to get out of the house. And it was such a commotion that my grandmother had already called the police, and I grabbed my little brother, and we all ran out in our pajamas. And I remember my mom was wearing this nightie, and my father, I believe, had ran off into the woods to elude the police. It was a situation. Those other nights, all the other nights that I would stay up and worry about the fact that my father might kill one of us, all of us in our sleep, like I was woken up and my mom was screaming for us to get out of the house. The police came, and I'm not sure what unfolded, but instead of going back into the house, we slept in my grandparents' fifth wheel in their trailer that they would bring to go to bluegrass festivals. And I didn't go back to pick out my clothes for my first day of high school the next morning. I believe my mom picked those out. And I can remember that I was wearing these high-waisted kind of mom jeans and these big fat Spalding basketball shoes and this t-shirt with Clydesdale horses on it and this patent leather vest that was quilted. And that's the ensemble that she had picked for me. And after all of this, we were sent off to school. And the kids in grade 7, first day, could never have known what I had just went through. They did make fun of what I was wearing that day. And that is how I started high school. That brought us to about when I was 12 years old, and things took a big turn following that. But I think it is important for me to acknowledge to younger Julie, to baby Julie, elementary school Julie. If I was talking to her right now as me, I think I would say, I am so sorry that you were not loved in the way that you deserved. You deserved to be celebrated. You deserved to feel safe. You deserved to be carefree as a child and to live out experiences that were not wrapped up in adult content. You deserved to go to sleep at night and rest peacefully and not worry about your own safety. You deserved to be handled with kindness. You deserved to be handled gently. You deserved to have a safe place to talk about what you were feeling. You deserved to be loved in such a healthy way. And I'm really sorry that you didn't get that. The silver lining is that you will grow up one day to be a magnificent woman. That everything that has come as an obstacle and a hurt and a scar that you will carry with you for a very long time will be woven together for this higher and greater good. One that you can hardly imagine for yourself. That with your story and with your healing and with your growth, that you will help other people heal and grow as well. That you will become such a beacon of light that it will be incredible for people to even imagine where you've come from. And you have. You have grown out of the mud into something so beautiful. You're going to be so proud of yourself. So don't give up hope. That's that. That's in a weird little nutshell of first chapter of what my truth is. And so I appreciate you sticking around, and I appreciate you hearing me out, and I appreciate being able to speak my truth. And universe, God, I give it to you. I turn this over now so that none of these things will be as burdensome as they have been. None of these things will hurt and be as weighty as they have been. I turn these things over to you so that I can be free. Thank you.